She finally spoke, not to shock the world, not to chase attention, not to rewrite headlines, but to breathe out a lifetime of quiet strength that had been carried in her chest for decades. This is not a press conference, not a viral soundbite, not a carefully edited statement written for applause. This is the voice of a mother who has watched her child be misunderstood, admired, criticized, idolized, and attacked, all while remembering the small boy he once was, the long nights, the fear, the hope, the sacrifices, and the invisible battles no one ever sees when success becomes loud. Imagine her standing not on a stage, but in a quiet room, sunlight touching the edges of old memories. Her words are calm, but they carry weight. There is no anger in them, only truth shaped by experience. She speaks as a woman who has lived many lives in one: model, dietitian, survivor, single mother, immigrant, dreamer, and as someone who understands that the world rarely sees the full story behind extraordinary people. She begins not with Elon, but with struggle. With the years when life did not look glamorous or powerful. With the seasons when survival mattered more than ambition. She speaks of raising children without certainty, without guarantees, without safety nets. Of making decisions that were heavy, sometimes terrifying, but necessary. Of choosing courage when fear would have been easier. And in that space, you understand something important: greatness does not emerge from comfort alone. It often grows in pressure, in instability, in moments where giving up would have been reasonable, but persistence chose otherwise. She speaks of watching Elon as a child, curious, intense, withdrawn at times, endlessly questioning the world around him. A boy who did not fit neatly into boxes, who saw patterns others missed, who carried ideas far bigger than his age. She admits it wasn't always easy. That brilliance often comes with isolation. That being different can be painful before it becomes powerful. That there were moments she worried deeply, moments she wondered how the world would treat a child who refused to be ordinary. She does not romanticize hardship. She does not claim that pain automatically creates success. Instead, she speaks honestly about resilience being taught, not inherited. About how children learn strength by watching adults face life without collapsing under it. She says that what she gave Elon was not a roadmap to wealth or fame, but permission to think boldly, to question authority, to fail without shame, to stand alone when necessary. As she continues, her message becomes less about her son and more about humanity. She talks about how easily the world simplifies people. How we reduce complex lives into headlines, numbers, and opinions. How we forget that every innovator, every leader, every controversial figure was once a child shaped by environment, love, pain, and persistence. She reminds the listener that no one is purely hero or villain. Everyone is layered, unfinished, evolving. There is emotion when she speaks of watching Elon face criticism on a global scale. Of seeing the internet turn human struggle into entertainment. of watching ambition be misunderstood as arrogance, intensity mistaken for coldness. She does not defend every decision. She does not pretend perfection. Instead, she says something far more powerful, that courage looks different when the stakes are high, and that those who attempt the impossible will always make people uncomfortable. She speaks of motherhood in a way that resonates far beyond fame. Of the quiet pride that doesn't need validation. Of the pain of letting children walk paths you cannot control. Of learning when to guide and when to step back. Of trusting that the values you planted will grow, even when storms come. Her words soften when she talks about love, not sentimental, not dramatic, but enduring. The kind of love that survives disappointment, distance, misunderstanding, and time. She explains that loving someone does not mean agreeing with everything they do. It means believing in their core when the world questions it. It means standing firm without shouting. She shares lessons learned the hard way. That reinvention is possible at any age. That starting over is not failure. That dignity is not tied to approval. That being underestimated can be an advantage. She speaks as a woman who rebuilt her life multiple times and refused to be defined by what she endured. There is a moment when she addresses young people directly. She tells them not to wait for permission to be themselves. Not to shrink their dreams to fit other people's comfort. Not to fear being misunderstood. She says the world has always resisted change before benefiting from it. That history rewards those who persist through ridicule long before recognition arrives. She speaks to parents too, telling them that they don't need to create perfect children, only resilient ones. That listening matters more than controlling. That encouragement can change the trajectory of a life. That belief, when given consistently, becomes a shield against the world's doubts. As her message unfolds, it becomes clear that this is not about defending a famous son. It is about reminding the world of something deeper, that progress is messy, that innovation is uncomfortable, that courage rarely looks polite, and that behind every person changing the future is a story filled with unseen sacrifices. She ends not with a conclusion, but with an invitation. An invitation to see people fully. To judge less quickly. To remember that humanity comes before opinion. To honor effort even when outcomes are uncertain. To recognize that the ones daring to imagine a different future will always walk alone before others follow, and in that final breath, her message lingers, not as a headline, not as a viral quote, but as a quiet truth echoing long after the noise fades. A reminder that strength can be gentle, that resilience can be elegant, and that behind every extraordinary journey stands someone who believed when belief was all they had. This is not just Elon Musk's mother speaking. This is a voice shaped by life itself, steady, honest, and deeply human. She continues, and her voice feels steadier now, not because the memories are lighter, but because she has made peace with them. She speaks about time, how it reveals truth slowly, how it strips illusions away, how it teaches you that applause and criticism are both fleeting. She says that when your child becomes visible to the entire world, you learn very quickly what truly matters. Not reputation. Not trends. Not approval. What matters is character when no one is watching, and intention when the noise is deafening. She remembers moments when Elon doubted himself, moments the public never saw. Times when ideas failed, when doors closed, when people laughed before they listened. She says confidence is often mistaken for fearlessness. But the truth is different. Real confidence is built while fear is still present. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is movement in spite of it. She watched him move forward again and again, not because success was guaranteed, but because stagnation felt worse than failure. She speaks about loneliness, not as a weakness, but as a companion of those who think differently. She explains that when you see the world ahead of its time, you often walk alone for a while. That isolation can either break a person or refine them. What determines the outcome is whether they learn to anchor themselves internally instead of seeking constant validation. She says this is one of the hardest lessons a mother can watch her child learn. Because you want to protect them, but you cannot shield them from becoming who they are meant to be. There is tenderness when she recalls small, ordinary memories, the kind that fame can never erase. Quiet conversations. Long car rides. Books scattered across rooms. Questions that had no simple answers. She smiles, remembering how curiosity filled every space. How even as a boy, he wasn't satisfied with how things were. He wanted to know why, and more importantly, why not. She pauses when she talks about criticism. About how the world is quick to assign motives without understanding context. She says that ambition, when paired with responsibility, can look threatening. That changing systems will always anger those comfortable with the status quo. She does not claim that every choice is right, but she insists that intention matters. That there is a difference between recklessness and risk, between ego and conviction. Her message grows broader now, touching on society itself. She speaks about how humanity often celebrates innovation after it succeeds, but resists it while it's forming. How visionaries are praised in retrospect but doubted in real time. She urges people to look beyond surface-level narratives and ask deeper questions. Who benefits from discouraging bold thinking? Who is threatened by change? She speaks of responsibility too. Of how power magnifies both strengths and flaws. Of how influence requires self-awareness. She admits that no one navigates that perfectly. That learning never stops, no matter how accomplished someone becomes. Growth is not a destination, it is a lifelong process. She addresses those who feel invisible, unheard, underestimated. She tells them that obscurity is not a verdict. That beginnings rarely look impressive. That many of the world's most impactful ideas were born in silence, not spotlight. She says that patience is a form of strength few talk about, but many successful lives are built on it. Her tone softens again when she speaks about legacy. Not wealth, not recognition, but impact. She says legacy is measured in how many people you empower to think differently, to believe more boldly, to act with courage. She believes that real success is leaving the world more curious, more capable, more hopeful than you found it. She reflects on her own journey, how she rebuilt herself repeatedly, how she refused to let circumstances define her limits. She says that watching her children grow taught her as much about herself as it did about them. That motherhood is not about control, but about trust. Trusting that love, once given honestly, continues to guide even from a distance. She speaks directly to critics now, not defensively, but calmly. She says questioning is healthy. Debate is necessary. Accountability matters. But dehumanization helps no one. Turning people into symbols erases nuance and compassion. She invites disagreement without cruelty, scrutiny without contempt. Her words carry a quiet authority now, the kind that comes from living, not performing. She reminds the world that progress is rarely comfortable, that transformation requires friction, and that those willing to shoulder that friction often pay a personal price. She closes this part of her message with something simple, yet profound. She says that belief is powerful. Being believed in can change the trajectory of a life. And sometimes, the most important thing a parent, a mentor, or a society can do is not to predict success, but to nurture possibility. And as her voice fades into silence, what remains is not a defense, not a justification, but a deeper understanding. A reminder that behind the headlines and arguments are human stories still unfolding, shaped by love, resilience, and the courage to keep going when certainty is nowhere in sight. The world may debate the man, but her message asks the world to remember the human journey, and to look inward at its own willingness to support those daring enough to imagine what does not yet exist. She resumes as if no time has passed, as if the message has simply been waiting, patient, steady, for ears willing to listen beyond noise. Her voice now carries something deeper than reflection, resolve. She speaks about endurance, about how the longest journeys are rarely fueled by excitement but by commitment. She says there were years when nothing made sense, when progress was invisible, when belief had to exist without evidence. And she reminds the world that this is where most people turn back, not because the dream was wrong, but because the silence felt too heavy. She speaks about discipline, not the harsh kind, but the quiet daily choosing to continue. She says genius without discipline fades, but discipline without applause builds foundations no storm can shake. She watched that discipline form slowly, through repetition, through setbacks, through an almost stubborn refusal to accept limits placed by others. She says that greatness often looks boring from the outside, because the real work happens long before the results. Her message turns toward fear, how it disguises itself as logic, as caution, as realism. She says fear will always sound reasonable. It will always tell you to wait, to settle, to be practical. But she learned that fear has never built a future worth inheriting. She says courage is not loud. It is often quiet, persistent, and misunderstood. She reflects on sacrifice now, and her tone grows heavier. She says every meaningful pursuit demands a price, and too often the public only counts the rewards. They don't see the missed moments, the strained relationships, the exhaustion, the internal battles. She says that success magnifies everything, including loneliness. And that those who aim high must learn to sit with that loneliness without letting it hollow them out. She speaks honestly about criticism again, but this time from a different angle. She says that when people cannot imagine what you see, they will try to shrink it. When they cannot control a vision, they will question the person holding it. She says this is not cruelty, it is human limitation. But she urges listeners not to internalize other people's inability to see beyond the present. Her words shift toward responsibility to the future. She speaks about children who will inherit the consequences of today's decisions. About how thinking long-term requires moral courage in a short-term world. She says that aiming to solve big problems means accepting that perfection is impossible, but inaction is unacceptable. She believes that trying and adjusting is braver than waiting for certainty that never comes. She pauses, then speaks as a mother again, not of pride, but of trust. She says there comes a moment when you realize your child no longer needs your protection, only your faith. Faith that they will continue learning. Faith that they will face their mistakes. Faith that they will keep moving forward even when misunderstood. Letting go, she says, is not absence, it is confidence. She addresses dreamers directly now. Those who feel late. Those who feel behind. Those who think the world has already chosen without them. She says timelines are illusions. That comparison steals energy meant for creation. That some paths look delayed only because they are being strengthened underground. Her voice grows gentle when she speaks about identity. She says you are not your worst moment, nor your greatest success. You are the sum of what you continue to choose when comfort and courage stand before you. She reminds listeners that reinvention is not betrayal of who you were, it is respect for who you are becoming. She speaks about hope, but not the passive kind. She speaks of hope as action, as responsibility, as something you build, not wait for. She says optimism without effort is fantasy, but effort without hope is exhaustion. The balance, she believes, is where change lives. As this part of her message settles, there is no grand ending. Only clarity. Only truth spoken without urgency. She leaves the listener with a quiet understanding that the future is not shaped by those who agree with it, but by those willing to endure being misunderstood while building it. And once again, the silence after her words feels intentional, not empty, but full. Full of reflection. Full of possibility. Full of the quiet courage it takes to keep going when applause has not yet arrived. She brings her message to its final breath gently, without drama, without trying to leave a mark, because the truth, she knows, does not need force to linger. Her voice is softer now, but it carries the deepest weight. This is not the end of a story, she says. It is only a pause where understanding is invited. She speaks about peace, not the kind that comes from everything going right, but the kind that comes from acceptance. Acceptance that life will never be fully understood by those watching from the outside. Acceptance that judgment is unavoidable when visibility is high. Acceptance that you cannot be both honest and universally liked. She says peace arrives when you stop negotiating with the world about who you are. She reflects on watching history unfold in real time, on seeing her child become a symbol, praised by some, criticized by others, dissected endlessly. She admits there were moments she wished the world could see what she saw, not a headline, not a myth, but a human being still learning, still carrying responsibility heavier than most people can imagine. But she also says she learned to release that wish. Because clarity must be chosen by others, it cannot be forced. She speaks about forgiveness now, not as an obligation, but as freedom. Forgiveness of critics. Forgiveness of misunderstanding. Forgiveness even of oneself. She says holding resentment is exhausting, and exhaustion clouds vision. Those who are building the future cannot afford to carry unnecessary weight from the past. She turns one last time to the idea of courage. Not the loud kind celebrated online, but the quiet kind practiced daily. The courage to think independently. The courage to take responsibility for failure. The courage to continue when applause fades. She says this courage does not announce itself. It simply shows up again the next day. Her words now feel less like a message and more like a hand resting lightly on the listener's shoulder. She tells parents that they are doing more than they realize. That consistency matters more than perfection. That belief, expressed repeatedly, becomes a voice children carry long after they stop seeking guidance. She tells dreamers that the world does not need copies. It needs original thinkers willing to endure discomfort. She reminds them that resistance is not proof of error. Often, it is proof that something new is being born. She urges them not to abandon their vision simply because it is lonely at first. She speaks to critics one last time, not to persuade, but to humanize. She says disagreement is natural, but cruelty is optional. That progress accelerates when debate is paired with empathy. That the future will judge not only what we built, but how we treated those who dared to build it. She acknowledges uncertainty openly. She says no one truly knows how the story will unfold. And that humility, knowing you do not control outcomes, is not weakness. It is wisdom. The role of each generation, she believes, is not to guarantee perfection, but to try earnestly, to learn continuously, and to leave room for improvement. As she reaches the end, she does not speak of pride. She speaks of gratitude. Gratitude for resilience. Gratitude for lessons learned the hard way. Gratitude for the ability to witness growth, even when it is painful. She says gratitude keeps ambition human. Her final words are simple, almost quiet enough to miss. She says that behind every bold attempt to change the world is a choice, to act instead of retreat, to imagine instead of conform, to endure instead of quit. And that choice, made repeatedly, is what truly shapes history. Then she stops, no applause. No closing statement. Just silence that feels earned, and in that silence, something settles. A deeper understanding that this was never just about Elon Musk, or fame, or innovation. It was about the human cost of dreaming big. About the unseen strength behind visible risk. About the power of belief passed from one life to another. The world may continue to argue, analyze, and speculate. But her message remains untouched by noise, a reminder that behind every figure who challenges the future stands a story built on resilience, conviction, and the quiet courage to keep going when certainty is nowhere to be found. And that, she leaves us with, is enough.